Let's take our Bibles this morning and turn to 1 John. 1 John chapter 4. First John chapter 4. Let me ask you a question this morning. What do you think about you? What's your opinion of you? If you were able, and I were able, to answer that with no judgment, no criticism, nobody having the ability to respond to us in some way or to contradict what we're saying or to answer us in any way. You know, kind of like what we talk about, your inner dialogue, how you talk to yourself in your mind, the conversation you have with yourself in your mind. Your opinion of you. So, nobody knowing what it is, just your opinion of you and not having to put on any kind of false humility or, your honest opinion of you. The kind of person that you are, the kind of friend you are, the kind of daughter or son or husband or father, mother, daughter, whatever that you are, wife. Your opinion of you. Well, nobody that's ever presented with that question ever says exactly what they think. You ever thought about that? How many times do you ever think you've got an honest answer from somebody about what they think of themselves? You ever worked a job and come in for your 90-day review? You ever had one of those? 3 months in, you go sit in the office, shut the door, sit down, and they say, okay, tell us how you think you've done in the last 90 days. Does anybody ever say, I've had a hard time. I've had a hard time acclimating. I've had a hard time getting along with my coworkers. I've had a hard time adjusting to this work schedule or the kind of work that it is. I don't understand my job yet. I'm doing very poorly. I'm underscoring everything. Is that what do you think anybody ever says that? Well, the only time I would imagine they would is that if they didn't want to keep the job anymore. Just going to be like, this job is horrible. I'm the worst employee you've ever had. No. Everybody always puts that best foot forward. And in all honesty, they do it to themselves too. Like in their own mind and their opinion about themselves. Everybody has a high opinion of themselves. Oh, no, I don't. I'm the most humble man I know. Well, that's how most people feel about themselves. But then what they really are doing is, they are, let me read this. In our own private thoughts and our inner dialogue, we all have a pretty high opinion of ourselves. We might not ever utter the words out loud or give it that much thought, but we rank ourselves against others almost all the time in all matters. You ever thought about that? We really do. And you can think you don't, because you may have even made a conscious effort to not be that person that does that. And yet, in some manners, you do. It can be because of how you was raised. It can be because of what school you went to. It can be because of the kind of friends you had or whatever. But deep down, everybody thinks that they round up to the highest common denominator when they're assessing themselves. Because who wants to walk around and just think that I'm the worst person ever? People who have a super low opinion of themselves always blame it on someone else. I'm nothing, but it's because I was abused when I was a kid, or somebody said ugly things. I was bullied in school a lot, and all this kind of stuff. Well, we'll get to that, but you're always ranking yourself against everyone that you see based on your opinion of your worth and your opinion of their worth based on their actions and their performance and their deeds. Now, performance and deeds and, good works, the Bible calls them good works, and righteousness and all that stuff, factor into the image you project and that I project to all the honest world out there as they come to their conclusions about what kind of person that I am. But you have an opinion about everybody. You might not ever say it, but you have an opinion about each and every person that you know in your life and what kind of caliber of person you think they are. And, even the people who stand on the corner and say, judge not, they do the same exact thing. I mean, all the people they're condemning for judging, what are they doing to them? They're doing the exact same thing. That's right, Jake. Same thing. They're measuring themselves against others to come to the conclusion of their opinion about how good of a person they are. And so that's why you see the trend of so many people, basically 100% of people, will always compare themselves with someone who is less than them in order to make themselves justified in being what they are. Had a man tell me yesterday about a guy who claims to love the Lord, but he wrests the scriptures to justify every single thing that he does in his life, including his adultery. And yet says that, we love the Lord, we just want to live for God, and the Lord will make our pathway straight, he said, if we just trust him. Whilst at the same time living in open adultery. Now, how does that man have such a great opinion of himself? Basing it out of what he thinks. Do you see how mutated and deformed that is? Oh my goodness, yeah. Well, everybody, you see it like that and it's so ugly. It's so ugly. How can someone, make that make sense to them? But if you think about it, all of us, in some way, at some point, either have done the same thing with different stuff, are doing it, or will do it about ourselves. Well, I would never do it. Well, yeah, we do, though. We really do. How we view others doesn't have as much influence on how we treat them as how we see ourselves does. Does that make sense? Let me read it again. The way we view others, it doesn't have as much influence on how we treat others as how we feel about ourselves has influence on how we treat them. If I think that you're a great guy, I'm going to treat you real nice. And if I think that you are not a great guy, then I'm going to put you in a different category over here and treat you a different way. But really, that's all based on my opinion of what a good judge of character I am. See how that circles back to all being about you? Are we to have discernment? Yes, we are. I don't want this to be confusing this morning. We are to have discernment. But discernment comes from God's guidance, not your opinion. What does the Bible say about whatever the subject matter is that you're having to discern about? This is the book. This is the judgment right here. This is the judge. And through that is how we're supposed to have discernment. The Spirit leads you into all truth. His Spirit. Problem is that we learn some rules, and then we start filtering everything through what we know about those rules, and then we start discerning. And have you ever been wrong about your discernment? Oh, I have. I very much have. In both directions. Things I thought was okay, safe. That person, we're good. I based what my opinion of them was based on my understanding of what I thought Well, my opinion, okay? That's really what it was. And I was wrong. Turned out to be a snake. And then I've also looked at people and thought less of them because of my opinions, my judgment, my discernment, and then found out later that I was very wrong. I misjudged those folks real bad. And had to eat a lot of crow. So we don't always get it right. Well, why is that? Well, because we think too much of ourselves. What I want to talk about this morning is this. This is the title of the message. How you see you. How do you see you? Are you self-deprecating and you say, I'm the worst person that's ever been? I've heard people get up and say that, I basically, to paraphrase what they say, boy, she's thundering, ain't it? They have no victory in their life. They're the worst person they know. They can't do anything right. Everything that they do is wrong. And honestly, people are better off to just steer clear of them because I just bring destruction into people's lives. I mean, that's their general, what they try to project out there, that is their opinion of themselves. But if you hone in on it real hard, that's not how they feel about themselves. That's just how they think everyone else has made them feel about their life. Based on, I've made poor decisions and everybody thinks I'm a loser because I can't keep my life together. So I guess I'm nothing. I guess I'm a loser. I can't get nothing right. Well, that's going to play into my next point, and this is it. How much talk do you hear about self-esteem these days? Well, that's what everything is based on. Bullies in school are bullies because they have low self-esteem and they're insecure and blah, blah, blah. Well, maybe that's so. But it always wasn't that complicated. Well, I feel like things about this have been overcomplicated because people won't turn loose of their pre-packaged opinion of themselves, and they're trying to filter all of that kind of emotion and feeling through their opinions about themselves. See, when you set yourself up on the high pedestal of, I've lived all these years, this is the knowledge that I have accrued, I've learned all my stuff through the school of hard knocks, and I've learned my lessons, so what I know, I believe. And then you filter everybody through what you believe, based on what you've learned by just getting kicked around by life because of your bad decisions. And then you judge everybody else and everything about them based on that. And then, I don't know, this whole matter of self-esteem, it's a common topic in our time. Here's some synonyms that you hear that go along with it. Self-love, self-care, right? I know people that will call in sick to work because they just needed a personal day. Just an R&R day. They just needed a day because everybody works nowadays. Men and women, they both work. And I know men that'll call in sick and just stay home and play video games all day by themselves while their wife goes to work because they needed a day. They just needed a break, a me day, me time. Well, today's Memorial Day. And all the men and women that we are honoring today in their memory, they didn't have that luxury. They didn't have the luxury of just being able to say, time out, I need to sit down. Time out, I emotionally cannot take this today. No, it don't work that way for anybody in life. To tolerate such a nonsensical idea even in our culture, really, is setting up the next generation for absolute destruction. And you're already seeing it. People that can't hold a job because they have to work more than 20 hours a week and they just can't emotionally handle being around other people, and social anxiety and dealing with the public. I always say this, everybody ought to have to work retail for at least 1 year of their life. Usually when they're like 16 or 17 years old and the whole wide world thinks you're an ignoramus. And they treat you that way. Because you learn how to handle adversity with grace. Because you have no choice. Is the customer always right? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But you don't always get to just put them in their place based on your opinion of whether they're right or not. Sometimes you just got to swallow hard and say, yes, sir. Hold on, I'll fix whatever's ailing you right now. Just give me a second. And it makes you have to, it changes. See, your opinion of you in that circumstance doesn't dictate the circumstances or the outcome of what goes on. You have to conform to necessity. It's good for you. Because you're going to have to do that all through your life. There's going to be circumstances that you should not have to bear. But there's not going to be anything you can do to rectify that situation. You're just going to have to knuckle down and bear it. With grace. And without it puffing you up. You know, the self-esteem thing is the idea that you can't love someone until you learn to love yourself. That's another one of the dogmas of that doctrine, really. You know, the idea that I cannot love you unless I love me first. Well, if I love me supremely, the world says that once I learn how to do that, then I have an abundance of love to give to others. But you can be blind in one eye and can't see out of the other and still understand that that's not how humanity works. If you love you supremely, you don't love nobody else. You love you. You take care of you. You provide for you. You do for you first. That's why the whole mentality of America first is a poison pill, folks. Just let me tell you. It's a poison pill. Who are we? What did we read that verse a couple weeks ago? It said, what have you that somebody didn't give to you? You know, we wouldn't even be a country if it hadn't been for France. They saved our bacon, right, in the 9th hour. And all I've ever heard about France is what a bunch of cowards they are in this country. Well, all the jokes, and I get it, but we owe them a debt of gratitude. You know, who are we to be so arrogant and prideful to think that we made ourselves? You know? That's what happens when you put you first. Everyone else just kind of fades into the background. They get left behind. So the idea that self-esteem comes from learning how to love you first is a lie of the devil. Understand that. You have self-esteem problems. You have, social problems with other people, and you can't seem to get along with nobody. What's your opinion of you? That's what you need to examine. They say that the same thing about forgiveness, too. You ever notice that? You know, loving you first lets you give other people more love. That can be a secular idea, but what about forgiveness? Forgiveness is a principle of the Bible. That's a thing that came from the mind of God, forgiveness. And yet they say if you can't forgive yourself, then you can't forgive other people. That also is a lie. A lie. You know how come you can forgive other people? Because you've been forgiven by God. It's the only way you'll ever truly understand the whole concept of being able to forgive somebody else, even that don't ask you for forgiveness, by the way, is because God, while we were yet sinners, He died for us. Why? So forgiveness could be an option for us. Is that a sight? It boggles my mind every time I think about it. So those things that I talked about here, those are lies. Things that the world has established as the catalyst to get you to the goal that you want about thinking good of yourself is to be able to do it. No, they've got it literally backwards. So how is self-esteem established and created then? If it's not by puffing yourself up and, pep rallying yourself in the mirror every morning, then what does it? Well, by the world's definition, it's selfishness at its core. Me first. Then I'm prepared to be able to be benevolent and bestow my goodness on others. You know that there's lots and lots of people that do good. And they do good for others. They feed the homeless. They go out and buy them tents and sleeping bags and clothes, and they go search them out. But they do that. The root intent of why they do that is not because, Joe Sixpack is sleeping under a bridge over there. It's because they want to feel better about themselves. If you go out and you feed the homeless once a week, then if anybody ever looks at you and says, well, what do you do for anybody? Well, let me tell you what I do. See, I've got this program and I've got a nonprofit, blah, 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 blah. And we video everything and put it on TikTok, and then people give us tons of money to be able to do it. And do I make money from that? Oh, yeah, I do. I put a lot of it back into sleeping bags and tents for the homeless people, but there's a lot of people do that on Instagram and stuff like that. Are they doing good? Yeah, man, them homeless folks get food, shelter, somebody that appears to care about them. And once again, I'm not going to judge their intent, but I will say this. Has it solved the homeless problem? No. It's because there's too much money to be made off of it. The good that a lot of people do is really, at its core, it's not to do good for the sake of the Lord and His kingdom. It's to make them feel better about themselves. It's to boost their self-esteem, to boost their opinion of themselves, how they see them, how they see themselves. This has been a problem since the beginning. The Pharisee that stood on the corner for everybody to see, and he prayed and he said, Lord, I give tithes and I give of all my goods and I fast and I thank thee that I am not like this lowly publican. Is praying something you should do? Absolutely. But the way he was doing it wasn't for the Lord, it was for him. You see? It was to make his opinion of himself be better. He said so. He said just as much. Ain't that a sight? People do that to feel better about themselves or to establish self-worth. That's another word that's thrown around a lot these days. Self-worth. Well, it's kind of a catch-22, like a contradiction, because I don't get to determine what that dollar bill laying on the floor right there is worth. Something else determined what that dollar is worth. Not me. I just have to take it for what it's worth. Use it for what it's worth. You don't get to establish what you're worth, my friend. Well, what about all the stuff I do? Don't that count for anything? Well, I don't know, does it? Why you do what you do. We've talked a lot about why do we do what we do. Because it's a question we really need to ask ourselves every day. Why do I do what I do? Well, is it to establish what you think you're worth? Because it don't work that way. Self-worth. Who establishes one's worth? What establishes it? Is it how much money you have? Well, no. They might be able to say, this man's worth $8 billion. But he could evaporate. And all of his stuff is still worth $8 million, but he ain't, because he's gone. He could just be snuffed out. And it happens every minute of every day. Somebody spends their whole lifetime building up what they think they're worth, and then in a moment of time, they're just gone. And whatever they did still remains, but you want to know what happens to a lot of what they did? It vanishes too. The grass withereth and the flower fadeth away. And so do people, and so do their stuff, so do their works, so do their charities and their nonprofits and their YouTube channels and all that. They just vanish. So does that establish what they're worth? No, it doesn't. As a human, where does your worth come from? Is it how much your mom and daddy love you? Well, I love my kids a lot. I put a lot of value on my children and my grandchildren. There is no number. There is the value that I put on them, but that does not establish their worth. It don't. Is it your accomplishments or your successes? Well, no. If I'm relying on what I accomplish to validate me as a person, I'm going to fail every time, and so will you. You know how many times I've been able to look in the mirror and say, "Attaboy, Seth, you had a good day. You did good. Look how far we got today. Wow." Yeah, no. You know how many times I've shut the door and looked in the mirror and said, "You idiot. You knew better. Look what you've done again. Now look what you got to do again to even go back and start over and figure out what to do now. You idiot. I'll let myself down. So do you. My failures are a lot more than my successes. And so my worth as a person cannot be determined by that. You can't view your worth as being determined by your own accomplishments only. Or you will fall into depression. Well, it's what the devil's standing in the wings watching for and waiting for. Because as soon as that starts to happen, he's in your head. And now you ain't worth anything. Is it other people's opinions of you that establish your worth as a person? Well, don't count them out. Because there's some that matter. But it doesn't, look, there's people that probably hate my guts. And then there's people who think that I can do no wrong. And neither one of them determine the person that I am. They don't determine my worth. Because if it was based on that, you could find as many people to not value you as you could people who do. You ever see somebody who has a grandson or something that's just ripping and tearing out here and just a feral, wild man out here just tearing up stuff and vandalizing everything and in trouble and just messing their life up greatly. And their grandma thinks that they're just the best thing that ever happened. They hung the moon. They can do no wrong. Well, does that determine that that boy is not doing those things? Well, of course not. Does it change everybody else's opinion about him that are having to endure his nonsense just because his granny thinks he's great? Nope, it don't. But what people think about you does matter. It's affected by the things that you do. So, see, it's kind of a fine line we walk with this subject here, because while your performance doesn't determine your worth, your performance does determine other people's opinions of you. But we're not talking about their opinions. We're talking about your opinion of you. How you see you. It's the thyroid of your whole life and how you deal with everyone else. You know, they say that your thyroid is like the thermostat that controls the temperature for everything in your body. And this is that. That's why the world hyperfixates on you, like you must think highly of yourself. Because the world's falling apart because, well, nobody does for others, they do for them. Whilst at the same time everybody's preaching to them, you first. No, by all means, you first. You have to put you first. You know, it's a false narrative. You know, Philippians 2, verse 3 says this, "Let nothing be done through strife or vainglory, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem other better than themselves." Well, what about that? Aren't you supposed to, like, self-esteem? Isn't that something you're supposed to have for you? No, the only time it really talks about esteeming is talking about esteeming others. And it says only this, esteem them better than yourself. Well, what about me? Well, you don't get to determine that. Others do. The same as you're supposed to do for others. Build ye yourselves up in your most holy faith. Does that mean you stand in the mirror every morning and say, I'm going to be super Christian today. I am not going to fail. Devil, you ain't going to get me today. Ha ha ha. No. Build each other up. Hold up the hands that are weak. Help each other. That's the only way we're going to make it through this, is if we are able to help each other. This isolation mentality that I am my own, it's me and Jesus and I'm just right behind him, and, you know, I don't care who I shed in my wake. Be careful. Be careful. You know, in the Pilgrim's Progress, at the end, when Christian was about to cross the river, he was so wore out and he was so weak. Right before he got to the river to cross, there was this friend that showed up, and his name was Faithful. He carried him across the river. Christian waded off into the river to cross. And Faithful, he went under. Christian was going under. He couldn't do no more. And then all of a sudden, something bore him up from underneath. And it was Faithful, his friend. Yeah, that's an allegory, but you got to think about it. Some people might not make it if you don't help them. You think we'll ever find out the ones that almost made it and didn't because we didn't help them? And we could have? Maybe. Might be some of those tears he has to wipe away. So, self-worth. So, who establishes self-worth and self-esteem? We have talked about what don't establish it, so what does? Because is it important? Well, here's the thing. Luke 12 and verse 6 says this. Jesus was talking about, and this is what he said, "Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 farthings? And not one of them is forgotten before God." Through the thousands of years of sacrifices, how many sparrows do you think died? An untold number. God didn't forget a single one of them. Just a little old bird. But even the very hairs of your head are numbered. Fear not, therefore. Fear not? Fear what? That you are nothing? That you aren't worth anything? That no one cares about you? What is the fears that people have that suffer from depression and anxiety and all this stuff? It is always that. No one cares about me. I'm worthless. My problems aren't important. And they're not being facetious. They really get to the point where they believe that no one cares about their soul, or their problems, or their struggles, or their fears, or their anything. The next step is then, well, what's the point of me even being here then? Fear not, therefore, he said, ye are of more value than many sparrows. Yeah. Here's the truth. God establishes your value. He established your value and my value before we were ever even born, before we ever were even thought of. Since the beginning of time, when he knew what was going to have to be done. You know, you read that the other night about what, last Wednesday night, about what God thought. He said to himself, I will not do this anymore. Why? Because evil is in the heart of man from his youth. The reset needed to happen. It did. But it didn't fix the problem. And he said, and I won't do this again because it's not going to fix the problem. And so the plan began. Jesus was going to come and be the propitiation for our sins. See, that's when he established your value. Nobody else gets to decide really what you're worth. God decides that. You look at somebody out here, and in my opinion, that boy ain't worth shooting. I've said that before. Some ne'er-do-well out here that he's incorrigible. I put value or don't put value on him based on what? It was on his performance, on his actions, on the way he is. And I might be justified in a lot of ways. But here's the thing. Does God feel that way about that young man? He absolutely does not. You know where you're supposed to get your self-worth from? God's opinion of your potential. You know, we've said this before. The Lord looks on the heart of man and he sees what he could be. He loves him. You know? When the prodigal son came home and his father seen him yet afar off and ran to him and fell on his neck and kissed him, do you think that boy looked like he had much to offer? Oh no. That was the lowest point of his life right there. He was completely spent. Filthy, hog pen, the worst. Starving. And yet his father seen what he could be. And it didn't affect one thing about how he loved him or how he showed him his affection. The value that boy had in this life was determined by his father and what he seen in the potential for that young man. And it's the same way for all of us. And we ought, God looks at us that way, and we ought to look at other people that way. I'm not going to put myself on a higher plateau than other people if I look at them the way God looks at them. Well, what's going to determine how I understand that? Because I'm going to see myself as God sees me, as I really am. I want to read a couple scriptures of some people who seen theirself that way too. 1 Samuel 24 verse 14. Let me set the scene. David was being chased by Saul all over. And you remember the story how that Saul was sleeping in a cave over there, and David and his men seen him, and they said, this is your chance. Go over and end his life and put an end to this nonsense. And he didn't. He went over there and cut the hem of his garment off, come back, and then he hollered across the valley and woke him up and said, look, I could have killed you, and I didn't, because it's not my place to do that. I don't have enmity for you. And this is what he said. After whom, he asked Saul this question, after whom is the king of Israel come out? Who are you out here chasing? After whom dost thou pursue? He said. After a dead dog. After a flea. David wasn't wrong about anything. He was completely innocent and being done 100% unjustly by a madman. And yet his stance when confronting this man was that I am the lowest of the low. How come? Well, you say, well, he had self-esteem issues. No, he didn't. He just seen himself as what he was. Read the rest of the Psalms, you'll see that he also understood what God thought about him too. That's where he found his courage and he found his strength. 2 Samuel 9:8, there was a boy named Mephibosheth. And he bowed himself to King David after David went and had him retrieved. And he said this, he said, what is thy servant that thou shouldest look upon such a dead dog as I am? Well, how in the world did these men have such a horrible, low opinion of themselves? Were they really that bad of a person? No. Before honor comes humility. He preached on that here a couple weeks ago. And that right there is a good way to see it. Psalm 22:6, but I am a worm, David said, and no man, a reproach of men and despised of the people. Well, did David do some good things for the Lord? Well, sure he did. My goodness. He accomplished more. I mean, think about all that David is. And yet this was how he's seen himself. And it was honest. He wasn't doing it just like in a sense of false humility. So, we have to see God. We have to see God for what he truly is. You know, Brother Kenny preached about that here the last time he was here. He said, when you see God high and lifted up, like Isaiah talked about, and then you see yourself for what you are, then there's some things that can happen between you and God. But not till then. This is kind of about the same thing. 1 John 4, verse 16 says this, we have known and have believed the love that God hath to us. God is love, and he that dwelleth in love dwelleth in God, and God in him. Herein is our love made perfect, that we may have boldness in the day of judgment, because, here it is, as he is, so are we in this world. See, you got to see you, how you really are, and then you got to see God, how he really is, and then you got to be like him. You got to be like him. 1 John chapter 3, verse number 2 says, beloved, now are we the sons of God, and it doth not yet appear what we shall be. But we know that when he shall appear, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. So that ought to be the goal. How do you see you? If you can get that worked out and be honest before God and before men and have some true humility about it, man, it unlocks the door for this matter of, you won't struggle with depression. You're not going to call yourself a worm and then just go crawl off in a hole somewhere and not do any good for nobody. No, our pride stands in the way of about anything good that we can do for the Lord. So, humble thyself under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time. Amen. How do you see you?